So brome and barley have obviously been given a helping hand by this farming system. And importantly with these weeds, we've got limited big weapons, but we've got several smaller tools for controlling them. So it really does need that integrated strategy. And I guess the reason we're using this tool approach is that it's a long seed bank game that we're playing. So brome and barley, it wasn't hard to justify focusing on brome and barley even at a national level, with brome being the fourth most extensive weed across Australia, and barley sneaking into the top 10 there as well, which is really on the list because of the pressure being put on EP farming systems on upper EP. And across the regions, it's also important across on the right there in the western region, brome and barley ranking very highly in terms of cost to control. And importantly in the south, they're still appearing prominently in the top 10. In the region that includes us here, or on upper EP, especially in the Mallee region, the lower rainfall areas, this is a study looking at the economic importance of different weeds. It is the obvious region where brome is the dominant grass weed and the most important grass weed in terms of extent and overall cost to grain production. And barley grass as well, sneaking in there across that broader upper EP Mallee region. So these are important weeds, and as Sam Kleeman and Gurjeet have probably told you, that it's taken quite a bit of work over recent years to bring the understanding of these weeds up to what ryegrass has been, given that ryegrass was the lead weed, I guess, in terms of having to take an IWM approach. So there's a good amount of knowledge now. So our project for the last few years has been plugging a few of those gaps and then starting to pull it together now. And what I'm going to focus on is control, because generally farmers across Australia, from anyone who does field surveys or studies like this, generally weed control is pretty good considering the challenges that we're facing, but it's coming at a high cost. So most of the cost of weeds, when you do this sort of national study, not a lot is due to weed loss, so yield loss. Most of the cost of weeds is due to the expense of control and managing that seed bank. So the question is, how can you reduce that cost of maintaining the low seed banks that give you farming systems flexibility? And this is some nice data. It's from Eyre Peninsula. It's one of the best examples of why this is not just a problem now, but it's getting worse. So you can see a fence line versus cropping paddock comparison here. In the top, you can see the shift in germination pattern, avoiding some of those early herbicide treatments through later emergence. But importantly, on the bottom here, you can see that lower emergence leading to more carryover into the next year, and that's why this sort of longer term framework is important for these weeds. So at the end, I'll pull this together into this tool that we've developed. So this tool called RIM, which some of you will be familiar with, has been around for a long time, created through UWA, and I was involved with it over there with ryegrass and managing resistance. But there seemed to be a gap in terms of for these particular weeds, and that's what we're trying to fill with a brome version and also a barley grass version due out next year. And some of you may have been involved with a few workshops we've run already with this brome RIM tool, which is available. So what this tool is really all about is putting the different pieces together, very much focused on managing seed banks over the 10-year period, testing different control options, and they could be new control options for some farmers and advisors in terms of what the payoffs might be, given that the payoffs aren't necessarily immediate when you're looking at 40, 50% weed control. You're not looking at spectacular differences in 1 year, you're looking at a long game. And also looking at ways to reduce pressure, and of course some of the big pressure being placed on a weed like brome grass is through the Group B or the Intervix type products, the IMI type products. And it's all about profit. So let's look at a few practices and what we've sort of found, and you've done some studies over here as well, which I'll throw in thanks to the work that the team at EPAF have done at SARDI. So let's look at some of the harvest weed seed control methods that you're all familiar with. Some of them not necessarily widespread yet, but certainly narrow windrow burning is. And it was easy to make it was easy for some people to jump to the conclusion that we'd be getting similar rates of success for some of these weeds, but I think this is just one study, but I think to me it captures a common finding with brome. This is some work Mike Moody was involved with through MSF, showing just how quickly the amount of brome grass that is able to be caught, not necessarily is caught, but is there to be caught, declines over time, and you're getting down to 30%. Some of the RE work shows that it might sit around 40% for brome grass. Certainly a lot less than the 75% that might be there to be caught, or 80% or more with ryegrass. So that's a serious consideration, but still not necessarily a reason to dismiss these practices, but it's a reason it's important data to factor in when you're considering the long-term implications. So what about pre-emergence control? Of course, that's the other big challenge with brome, I think in particular. So some of the work we've done on the sands in the mallee, so you can achieve with Chris Preston and others, you can achieve 75% plus brome control using pre-ems, other than trifluralin, which is a poorer option. Secura, for us at least, has worked reasonably well in most years, better than trifluralin, but Secura plus Avadex, as most of you will know, is the pinnacle in terms of control. We haven't found anything that betters that, but we haven't found any combination that's really more expensive than that either, unfortunately. So you're sitting at around $70, which is not really an option, and for most of our lower rainfall farmers, and it's actually hard to find where you'd find a spot for that expensive treatment, except for in extreme circumstances when you work on the economics and consider what other options might be available. But we found pretty good success with Secura plus Avadex, and the important thing is it's been consistent even in other years when the other pre-emergent combinations have failed. So here's just one example from last year where all of what you might call the standard combinations, trifluralin with metribuzin, they actually had no effect last year, no significant effect on brome in our trials at Karoonda with Chris Preston last year. It's just one of those seasons where it just wasn't going to work, but the standout again, even in those difficult conditions, was Secura plus Avadex, reducing those brome panicle numbers. So it's panicle numbers that are important here in terms of seed set, and that's I guess the other key point. And that's the other key reason why a lot of our focus has been on crop competition and the increasing importance of crop competition, something that was easy to overlook when we had the full arsenal of herbicides for some of the earlier weeds, but we certainly haven't got a very wide arsenal of herbicides for brome, and it's sort of the return to crop competition, I think, is a big pattern that we're seeing. So some nice numbers from Minipet, just recent results from Minipet that you might have seen in the ePath publications, just showing the common row spacing effect you might see from going 30 down to 18. Whether that's practical or not for your clients is a different question, but you can see a 45% type reduction there in this case barley grass seed set. So these are substantial differences, and there's a lot of practices we're finding in that 40 to 50% control category, and that level of extra crop competition through row spacing is one of them. Higher weed density, so just increasing seeding rate or leading to higher wheat density, or as I'll get to in a minute, through better establishment methods. You can see that's also leading to the 30 to 40 to 50% type increases through some of the work that Mandy's led at Minipet. So these are all factors that can be included. They're not necessarily the one factor on their own, but they are important considerations. And this is some work from Barry Mudge on a related project where he's looking at if you are going to have a year where you're focused on crop competition to suppress weed seed set, and you might be doing other practices as well. What about variety choice? And he's always favoured Fathom barley as an option for that, and he's got the results here in last year actually, 2016, showing that doubling Fathom barley reduced the seed set by 53%. Doubling wheat at the same time didn't actually have much effect at all. So there is that crop variety interaction that you might be able to utilise as well to get those figures up above 40, up into the 50s. So still, that's a substantial difference there, and with the right varieties, you can get that extra effect. But with the less competitive varieties, perhaps you're not getting that benefit. But the reason crop competition's of real interest to us is a weed like brome obviously loves the sand, loves the low rainfall conditions, and loves the sand, and a lot of our sand is non-wetting. So we've put a fair bit of focus on that, given that you've got this important weed on sands where germination is often poor in different seasons in particular, depending on the conditions. So what can we do to improve crop competition under those conditions? Traditionally, inter-row sowing on these sands, it's easy, makes sense. On the flats, it's probably what you need to do to get through the heavier stubbles. But most of you would have observed how much brome just loves to emerge from last year's crop row, where crop seed, weed seed accumulates, where the conditions are much better for emergence. So this is very common to see 10 times the density of brome, for example, in or near last year's crop row because of seed accumulation and better conditions. So you're really setting yourself up, I guess, for a problem by having most of the weeds germinating as far as possible from this year's crop. So if you shift to on-row, and there's a number of reasons obviously to shift to on-row seeding on non-wetting sands because of the better establishment, but the weed interaction's been quite spectacular in our Karoonda results. So on the sand, and we're not recommending this for soils other than these sands, but where you are able to place this year's crop row on or near, if you've got technology a bit more close to what Jack's got compared to our Siro machinery, you can place it on the side of the row. But getting close to last year's crop row, you're getting much better establishment and potentially much better crop competition. So here's just some results looking at crop establishment 2015. This is a tough year for establishment, so you can see, of course, you're going to get better weed control when you've got such dramatic establishment differences like that, but it's a spectacular effect just in terms of establishment. Not spectacular at Loxton, where it wasn't actually non-wetting, still a reasonably difficult sand, but not non-wetting. So this is really, we're focusing this very much on non-wetting sand conditions. But you can see massive improvements in establishment. And what you can see here is another result from 2016, which was sort of a longish season, so things caught up towards the end, but that early vigour being so important on sands as well, that early growth being important, and we certainly got that benefit there again in 2016. So it's been a very consistent factor. In some years they catch up through the year, some years they don't, but the important thing I think is that early vigour. So what does it mean for weed suppression? Well, we've been running this for 3 or 4 years now, and we look like we'll get some more good results this year. And you're looking at 70% less seed set in that really tough establishment year of 2015. It was 80% in 2014, and we've had bigger other results coming through as well. So there's some big differences there that can really make a big difference when you're trying to manage these difficult sands with a difficult weed like brome grass in this case. So quite spectacular differences, and there aren't many other practices that will generate this 70 to 80% effect. Just some early results from this year, just looking at crop biomass. Looking at interactions, of course, interaction with pre-em is probably a question a few of you would be asking about this. How did the pre-ems work? It's hard to generalise, but in this case you can see a little bit of interaction. There's evidence of some damage with the on-row, but I don't think it will be significant in the end. We'll wait and see. But what you can see is, once again, in terms of crop biomass and big crop biomass differences at growth stage 31 here in this case, which will no doubt, I would say, have an effect on the brome seed set later on. So it's shaping up as another effective year. All right, so that's just a few of the different factors we're looking at, and there's other work going on in other parts of the project, such as ryegrass in New South Wales, looking at double breaks and things like that. Developing this brome model with the help of Gurjeet and Sam and other people like that, some of the other data from around the place. Can we reasonably predict brome behaviour under different cropping conditions? It's not an easy thing to validate with seasonal variation, which the model doesn't include, but we think we've got it to a reasonable level, similar to how the current ryegrass version operates. So what you're really doing with this tool, if you haven't played with it, is you're setting up a 10-year rotation, going through with a whole range of different weed management practices from sowing time right through to harvest practices. And you're getting the chance to compare different strategies, most importantly in terms of profit, the yellow figure there, and also tracking seed banks over time and hopefully lowering weed management costs as well. So it's a chance to compare a few scenarios side by side. The brome version and the ryegrass version is available now through ARI, the brome one through me at the moment until next week when it gets up. Barley grass should be ready 2018 with a bit more work with the a bit more consultation needed with the guys over here just to make sure we've got it working well. So let's just look at an example here. Just one last example to finish off. Pretty basic rotation, and I guess the way I like to use this tool and with groups, we've probably run about I don't know, 10 workshops now, I think, across EP and the New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia with the Brome version with farmer groups and advisors. So what you're looking at is this rotation over time, relatively basic one. This is just one from related to what a farmer used recently. And you can see that here there's a fair reliance on IMIs, fair reliance on clethodim. It's just using standard crop seeding, so the densities would be standard, not the higher densities we were looking at in some of those results. And you're looking at an average gross margin over that period of $179. And you can see weed seeds are reasonable, down ending up below around 5 per square metre, but probably room for improvement. So the scenario that you might want to be testing is it worth introducing something like narrow windrow burning? And we will assume here that you might get 40% control when you choose to use it, 40% reduction in brome grass seed. And we'll assume that you could try Secura and Avadex, see whether it's worth knocking down that early high level there around where it's too high, and also the higher crop competition. So in the scenario, it wasn't actually worth including Secura Avadex in this case, assuming the cost was taking from trifluralin up to, which is pretty low control, but up to $70 a hectare. But even with double the control, it wasn't worth it in this case. Sometimes it is. But we've introduced narrow windrow burning, particularly early, canola, some wheat early, and we've also introduced higher seeding rates early suppression. We've increased the average profit by $7 on average over the 10 years, $70 a hectare. And then it's allowed us to certainly not completely remove any reliance on Intervix in this case, but reduce one or two, I think it was, of the Intervix applications. So it's an example where these things could be introduced for slightly higher profit, reducing some reliance on these herbicides, which is probably what you want to try and do. And in this case, it's using narrow windrow burning in 4 out of the 10 years. So that's the sort of typical scenario that farmers and advisors might test here with these practices. And if you think your efficacies are different to what I've sort of presented there, you just plug those in. It's fully adaptable. So just to finish off, last slide, rather than concluding myself, this is just feedback from some of the workshops that we've run around the place. So often when groups use this tool, harvest weed seed control is something that they think has appeal, I guess, without having invested in it up to this point. Sort of planning of rotation, so a more strategic approach to managing a weed seed bank over time. Certainly extra crop rotations, considering the manuring options and some of the other topping type options, hay in particular in the mallee at the moment. Changing herbicide usage patterns, introducing windrow burning and some of the more non-chemical controls. So it's just a way to pull together some of these various practices into a strategy and see how they might work. And as a workshop tool, it seems to be quite useful for farmer groups.